100 years ago, our touchstone, mystic Inayat Khan, wrote in his journal, "The day is not far off when, if not through religion, then by science, the people in the West will realize the oneness of the whole being, and that individuals are nothing more than bubbles in the sea."
Welcome to the premiere episode of Nameless, Evolution Begins Within, a magazine-style podcast bridging science, mysticism, and the human experience. Thank you for joining us. Hello, I'm Julia Arrocco, and joining me is our co-host, Amin Dadi. On this premiere episode, we are exploring the quantum world, as it compares to the 17th century Newtonian science, which is about the objective world and denies human value, creativity, and our ability to evolve. I'll explain some key points discussed in the documentary movie, The Dalai Lama Scientist, as a short compare-contrast on what Buddhism has known for the millennia and contemporary science is finally beginning to understand. In our segment, If Not Now, When? Conversations with Alice Wyatt, she asks, what is reality? Alice will leave that to the gurus to answer, but in her latest segment, she speaks about her battle with depression and the alternative reality that often creates. She gives us helpful tips for giving grace to those who live outside our specific reality. And now, here is our co-host, Amin Dadi.
Thanks, Julie. For this episode, in contrast to Newtonian attempts to describe life in an objective way, I called up Dr. Don Wiener so we could talk about the subjective forces that appear to work in a more quantum physical way. A way in which the subtle energies have been proven to inform the grosser ones in fascinating experiments, and further, how we might deal with the multiverse, the effects of which are now being discovered. Don and his wife Diane have produced a YouTube video course called The Gabrielite Work, a relational approach to spirituality, based on their 20-year investigation into the subtle forces. And later, in Listening In, we hear reports from the meditation and sleep dreams of an explorer who dives into these subtle realms that are nevertheless crucial to what many have identified as a great shift in human activity, the next step in our evolution. This nameless essence has in large part inspired the title of our podcast. And as we have dubbed these intrepid explorers in physical space astronauts and cosmonauts, we'll listen to the reports of the Innernaut. This week's report is entitled, We Know Who We Are.
Before we begin, we invite you to take what intrigues you and leave the rest. Our faithful guide in life is our felt sense. When we ask ourselves, how does experiencing this information or situation feel? We easily find our answer. If it doesn't feel right, drop it, move on. It's not meant for you. The same goes for content on our episodes. Some concepts will resonate and feel good, sparking something on the inner planes, while other information may be confusing or not ring true. In those cases, simply leave it behind. We are in a world of the great unknown, where the human eye perceives less than 1% of all available light. So we ask you, how much can really be known when we cannot see 99% of what's in front of us? That's why we believe the key to life is asking the question, how does this feel in my heart? So let's start out the science section as we do by defining things. So let's define quantum science and what it is. But first, let's start with the word quantum, which is a required or an allowed amount, especially an amount of money, legally payable in damages. The court must determine the quantum of compensation due. aka a share or a portion. In physics, a discrete quantity of energy proportional in magnitude to the frequency of the radiation it represents. Another definition is an analogous discrete amount of any physical quantity, such as momentum or electric charge. Britannica.com describes quantum mechanics as science dealing with the behavior of matter and light on the atomic and subatomic scale. In attempts to describe and account for the properties of molecules and atoms and their constituents, electrons, protons, neutrons, and other esoteric particles such as quarks and gluons. These properties include interactions of these particles with one another and with electromagnetic radiation, i.e. light, X-rays, and gamma rays. So the article goes on to say, the behavior of matter and radiation on an atomic scale often seems peculiar, and the consequences of quantum theory are accordingly difficult to understand and to believe. So there you go. There's Britannica.com saying it's accordingly difficult to understand and to believe. Well, I think the problem is, we're trying to wrap our mind sense around something that really belongs in the heart sense, because it's hard for our mind to understand endless expansion, endless possibilities, endless everything, and that things are all interconnected. So when your brain can't comprehend something, that's the surest way to tell you to get into your heart chakra, because that's where true expansion and possibility lies, in the human heart. There's never-ending possibilities in the human heart. And speaking of the human heart, that brings us to the movie, The Dalai Lama Scientist. So I came across this movie on a major streaming service, and it was so fascinating to me because they were really juxtaposing Western science and Buddhism. So they broke it into two major sections, and we're just going to go over just a couple points here just to kind of once again loosen you up to opening up your consciousness, aka your heart chakra, really, to understand what the quantum world really has to offer. The Dalai Lama Scientist broke this into two things called the nature of the universe and the nature of the mind. So we're going to focus on cosmology, quantum physics, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about cognitive science and psychology as a juxtaposition. So cosmology says, in the Western world, the Western science says, the universe began with a bang, and it'll probably go until it becomes dead and cold, although a big bounce or an endless return is possible. So Buddhism science says, our universe is a repeated series of dissolutions and originations of universes. Okay, so Western world says, there may be many partially connected time-space universes. And Buddhism says, our universe is not the only one that exists. There is a billion-fold universes where other consciousnesses and life exists. So in quantum physics, Western science says the observer/experimentalist cannot be entirely detached from nature at the quantum level. And in Buddhism, known things have no identity independent of their ways of acquiring knowledge. Okay, so back to the quantum physics in the Western world. Electrons appear to have no size. They act like a massless point, but they acquire mass where they interact with some other particles. And Buddhism says, things have no properties of their own. They are dependently originated. They are dependently originated. And under the neuroscience heading, so Western science says, due to neuroplasticity, the brain responds to experience and can be continually trained, especially during three major periods in the early life when the brain is radically organized. And in Buddhism, they say, the mind can be continually trained through meditative practices, leading to enhanced well-being. And back to the neuroscience of the Western science, new developments have created a whole new era of investigation where more and more will be learned about the brain than ever before. And in Buddhism, they say, expert Buddhist practitioners can sustain key states of attention and awareness and provide reliable, first-person reports of experience in ways that greatly enhance scientific research on the mind and the brain. So what they're referring to is they basically put a bunch of monks into MRI machines, and they had them meditate, and they scanned their brains while they were meditating. Another really fascinating thing that they did in this project. So that's kind of our warm-up to the interview that Amin is going to have with Don Wiener, and that starts right now.
Earlier this year, due to the COVID indoor meeting and travel restrictions, Don and Diane Weiner produced a YouTube-based video course called The Gabrielite Work, a Relational Approach to Spirituality. I caught up with Dr. Weiner by telephone, who has been pursuing this subject for over 20 years. We began the discussion with how do we deal with the multiverse that is posited by quantum mechanics, and we expanded to talk about experiments that shed some light on subtle energy and the power of the observer effect.
Well, actually, you are in all of those places, and you can't focus on all of them at once, but you can have a sense of identity that spans all of those, and you can, I call it, modulate your consciousness in terms of whatever the particular goal is. But the possibilities that happen when you can align with, also sometimes call it the rest of yourself, like Merchant talking about reach that ray from that divine sun. Well, we're that whole ray, but usually we think of ourselves at the far end, and we're trying to relate to what we think of as at the opposite end, but we're that whole thing. And when we can activate that sense of ourself, then there's possibilities of what can emerge from that could not happen from what we think of as the divine side, and could not happen from what we think of from the human side, but only in the relationship between those two. Yeah. So that's the kind of thing we'd like to talk about.
Well, one of the things that brings up in me is the notion that the lower vibration can't ascend to the higher vibration. Right.
Yeah.
And so the whole positing of what when Pirvalai, say like it's the sword of ecstasy that cuts the Gordian knot. In other words, elevating your consciousness or somehow getting to that consciousness, then you can, reprogram. So on.
Yes, and for that to happen, there has to be a quantum leap in your, you can call it your operating system, your frame of reference. It never can happen if you think of yourself as a separated being. You're going to be forever frustrated trying to reach the goal of what you think of the goal of spirituality is supposed to be about, because it's not that. It's not you either dissolving back to where you came from or disappearing, so nothing but the divine comes through here. That's not the reason there's an existence. It's requires us to be human beings.
Yes, and so really what we're doing then is expanding our view of what a human being actually could be if they were...
Yeah. Or I would say what is, but it is not realized. Like even Harvey saying that we are beings of bi-unity. We are human divine beings, and he says that each side creates the other, and neither side has an existence without the other. That we are both that, but we can't think that way from our usual way of thinking. So we have to have a total breakthrough in our. I would say a way of relating to everything, including our sense of ourselves.
Well, isn't that where quantum mechanics comes in? Because a little bit that I read is that things, particles, whatever, don't exist without the others.
That everything is connected. Everything is interconnected with everything else, and they also talk about if two quantum things have the exact same quantum state, they're not two things. You can't have two things that have identical quantum states. So there's, on the most fundamental level of existence, there's a uniqueness to everything, including us. Each of us is a unique, I think of us as a unique node in the cosmic neural network that is capable of becoming awakened and going beyond even pure light, saying participating in the divine programming, I'd say being able to enable the human divine creative process that can only take place through that pairing of the two sides. It can't happen from what we think of as the divine, and it's never going to happen from what we usually think of as the human side. But something is born in that relationship that brings about, well, even Harvey's saying the new creation born at every instant. Well, if we haven't awakened to a certain extent and can't participate in that process, then what our minds are very good at doing is extrapolating a linear projection and continuation of how things have been and how we assume things are going to be. So there really can't be anything dramatically different that takes place. We've basically encapsulated ourselves in a very narrow slice of what the whole reality is all about.
Well, I was privileged to be in the presence of Buckminster Fuller when I was in graduate school. And the point he made was that each of us is, in fact, an X, Y, Z unique point in the universe. All three dimensions. And, of course, he's famous for saying, I seem to be a verb as opposed to a noun. And also that our limited ego is built on the past, it seems to me. In other words, we've accumulated and collected all kinds of things. In fact, you could say, one of the possibilities is we've actually been here for 1 million years, and we have inside of us all of these past things, including archetypes, and the way we come at stuff, somehow isn't just our parents, just isn't some sort of limited, we could say classically, and veils of light, which we mistake the path for what is. In other words, people are very happy not having, in myself, I was a bull in a china shop, and I'm so happy that I'm only a small donkey in a china shop now. In other words, my existence has been refined over the years, and I'm happy for that. But I think maybe instead of expanding all the way out, people get what people I would be called sclerosed.
Oh yes, indeed, that's a great term.
Arterial sclerosis.
Yeah, and well, here's a big thought that perhaps could be a part of this podcast. That mystics say that our souls identify with whatever's reflected on the mirror of the soul. So our soul thinks, well, I am this body, and so, well, okay, been there, know that. But a thought that came to me not too long ago is that what we think of as the divine being knows him herself by the returning light of all that's in existence. And that light is transformed to various degrees depending on how awakened beings are and what they've done to that light in their own lives. So we're actually enabling the divine being to evolve through the process of awakening. So what we think of as something that, we're doing this for ourselves is really, it's a divine service.
Well, I call that, I would call it a divine idiosyncrasy, but in other words, owning our idiosyncrasies. I grew up in a family that was not fond of creativity, and so there I was, and it took me a long time to go, what they didn't like, I became the person they didn't like, and I'm happy. I've owned my point in the universe. I am, that's how I come at, that's my light, the particular shade of it, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, glad you did.
Yeah, well, yeah, me too. But but always, here's the thing, and of course, I'm sure you probably think it's the thing too. How do we get the door, if we want to use that terminology, to crack open a little? Do you think the universe is taking care of that for us at the present time? In other words, we seem to be creatures of habit, and our habits are being disrupted.
Well, here's where, and I've got bunches of more than we can ever fit in a podcast of juicy science stories that are mind-boggling. Well, I'll share a few with you. Well, one of them, I can't remember, some French scientist, and don't ask me how he got funding to do this, but made a little robot that was driven by a random number generator. So all it would do is, if the number was, let's say, 1, it would go forward, 2 back, 3 to the right, 4 to the left, and so on. So you put it in a room, and it would do like the drunk walk, just randomly wander around. Well, they imprinted some newly hatched chickens with this robot, and not remarkably, the chickens thought the robot was their mother and followed it around. No big deal. But then they put these same chickens in a corner of the room with wire, so they could not get out of that corner of the room, and they put the robot in the middle of the room, and the robot spent statistically way more time in the corner of the room with the chickens than it did in the rest of the room, way against the statistical odds of doing that. So possibilities that come to mind are chickens have psychokinetic abilities and can influence computers. Computers are conscious, and the robot wanted to be with its babies, or you can come up with your own. But whatever you come up with, it does not fit with your model of reality, right?
Right.
Okay, so here's another quickie. Are you familiar at all with the research of William Tiller, who's done subtle energy research?
And I don't remember that specific name.
Okay. Well, his most famous one is he took a little bit of circuitry that wasn't hooked up to anything and put it in the middle of a table, and he put 4 experienced meditators around it, and their job was to try to put an intention into the circuitry so that if they shipped it to a totally automated lab, it could be somewhere on the other side of the world, it would raise the pH of water in a beaker that had no physical contact with by 1 point. Well, the intention could be up 1 or down 1, but let's say up 1. Well, they did this many times, and sure enough, over a period of 3 days, the pH in the water went up 1 point. Well, how on earth could that happen? I mean, this certainly violates any kind of laws of physics. There's no current in this. Okay, well, but even more remarkable than this, the laws of thermodynamics in the laboratory changed, where instead of entropy increasing, entropy actually decreased measurably. So there was more order in the environment of the laboratory. Well, how can that happen? So Tiller's theory, which, has been an inspiration to me for 20 years or more now, he said whenever there's a connection between subtle energy and what he calls ordinary reality, the subtle energy conditions the ordinary reality and opens up a space of possibilities that could not occur in the ordinary reality without the contribution of the subtle energy. So in the usual equations of the laws of physics, now a term is added because of the subtle energy that is normally 0, because there's no, physicists don't plan on subtle energy entering there's no intention of them doing that. So I took from that whenever we engage in anything, an experience, it could be a feeling of deep awe in nature, listening to music, it could be an inner experience in meditation. We are bringing about a linkage between subtle energy and usual reality, and we've now opened up a whole new space of possibilities. Mershon's terms in Akasha, but an Akasha is not just more room in the usual space. There's been a whole new space created in which now things can take place that were impossible before. So
the word accommodation, to my mind, brings up a multidimensional accommodation. In other words, it's not just a bigger room of the same kind.
Right. So these are rather mind-boggling. Well, another one is that entanglement of particles. Physicists have done experiments.
Sure.
Entanglement, where something in the past got entangled with a particle that didn't exist at the time that was in the future to it. And by the time that future particle was created, the past particle no longer existed. So you can have an entanglement going across time. Here's retrocausality.
Right. Well, don't the Sufis say that if you get to a certain vibration yourself, you can heal 3 generations back and 3 forward?
Well, I would say unlimited generations. But anyway,
it's boggling enough to go 3.
One more goodie with this one. Roger, what's his last name now? I'm blank on, but Nelson, who used to be at the engineering lab at Princeton, did research for years with random number generators. And these little devices, all they would do is generate random numbers and output what they generated. So his first experiment, he would just bring in people to his lab and say, see if you can alter the output of this thing so it's not random anymore, statistically deviates. And he found that most people could do that. Well, that's already pretty amazing. You change something just by your intention. But here's the mind-boggling one. So let's say I bring you into my lab, and I ran the data yesterday and stored it on a hard disk, but no one's printed it out, no one's looked at it. And I say, I'd like you to see if you can change the output from yesterday between 2 and 3 in the afternoon so it's no longer random. And sure enough, they'd do the experiment, then they'd go and analyze the data, and that would be the only time of that day where the data was not random. So you've changed something that's already happened. It's been stored. It just hasn't been observed. So the universe is not the way that we think it is.
Yeah.
So my long segue answer to your question, well, how do we go about this? Normally in spirituality, the only choices on the menu are be stuck in your dualistic consciousness and, suffering and et cetera, unfulfilled desires, or get to a state of either dissolution of identity and dissolving into the ocean of bliss, or in Buddhism, just go beyond any identity into, you can't even say what it is. So those are your choices, A or B. Well, there's a third choice, which I think Sufism is all about, but it really didn't have this term before, I don't think, which I call relational unity. And what relational unity is, being in a state of interconnectedness, conscious interconnectedness with what you're experiencing, and you don't feel any separation from it. There's this total permeability and circulation of light back and forth. But there's also the maintenance of your identity and the identity of what you're experiencing. And in this state, you have what the Sufis say, the light upon the light, or the two presences that create the third presence. And now the space of possibilities, once again, has been opened up to something can come through that couldn't happen from, let's say it's two people, either person by themselves, but is possible because of what emerges in the relationship between the two.
Yeah, it's synergy in our day-to-day lives that the sum of the parts, it's the total is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, and it's not even in the same dimension as the two. It's not just, well, there's a lot more than there was, but
it's actually a vibrational change. You can observe this, if you wish, by meeting someone that you've never seen before. And sometimes it's hello, goodbye. And sometimes it's like, who are you? In other words, there's something going on, or as people used to say, standing in the checkout line of the supermarket, making small talk. You can also be transmitting light back and forth at the same time.
Absolutely. So it's possible to be in a state in our walking around lives of more and more of the time of being in relational unity with whatever we're experiencing. And something that I just say many times in the classes I give is that everything is a portal to the sacred. No matter what it is, no matter how horrible it is, it's a potential opening to sacredness emerging. But the sacredness is not something sitting there waiting for us to tap into it. Sacredness is actually created by virtue of the relationship with what it is that we're experiencing. And so we can bring about a transformation of the world, of situations, by our way of relationship, what's going on. Not that we're thinking, I'm sitting here sending out all this good energy. It just naturally arises through a way of relating with what we're experiencing.
I think it's very difficult for a person to not consider themselves a unique point as an ego. in other words, for bringing it down to, well, what's good for me and mine, that aspect of the self. But then there's this other aspect of the self where I'm a beacon of light. People used to say, well, your eyes also emit photons. They don't just take them in. And so at one day, some bazillion light years from now, the light from your eyes will reach a star. And I always thought that was, people are missing the point that they are a transmitter. They think they're just running around getting all this data is coming in. And unfortunately, sometimes they have an opinion about it and a self-evaluation. It's gotten to the point where I just, people say, how are you? And I say, well, I'm not really very good at self-evaluation. Then I say, well, I'm fine. But in other words, what is it? The mind that created the problem can't solve the problem. In other words.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, on a cosmic way of talking about this, we could say that each of us is the whole universe's way of knowing itself.
I love what Pierre Shabda said one time, which I guess he says that we are an undivided portion of the universe. It's not like we're a particle. We are the universe, undivided. Each person is an undivided portion.
Yeah, well, even Arby says that each soul is its own entire universe, but all of our universes are interpenetrating and interconnected with all of the other ones. And we have the possibility of, again, I'll use the term modulating consciousness to whatever level of existence is needed for an experience to take place or a relationship to take place. So it's just like the room that you're sitting in and I'm sitting in is filled with all the radio waves and TV waves and broadband internet that's floating around. Every bit of that is present in every tiny bit of the room, but they're all there together. And if you have the means, you can pull out what you want from that. They're all coexisting in seemingly the same space.
So can we shift gears a moment? What is the webinar about?
Well, this webinar, so the call is with Ravani Ra and me. So the webinar is with Rakib and me.
Right.
The webinar, so I certainly like most of the call to be about what the two of us are doing, but could be mentioned. The webinar is called Upgrading the Software of the Multiverse. And we had a quote introducing it. This is Pierre Wyatt. I believe the Sufi teachings represent the spiritual dimensions of the scientific paradigms of our time. We are the being of God discovering unforeseeable possibilities within himself by concretizing that which has never been done before. So We're going to be talking about God and science and the notions of God and religion that are, for the most part, back in Newtonian physics, which don't have much to do with what's been discovered about the true nature of reality. And just really based on a dualistic relationship of what we think of as the divine. And
along with Euclidean geometry, which is, I'm sitting in a box that was made by them.
Oh, yeah, and all the subsequent problems. So we're going to be talking about, so we had like major sections, God and science, experiencing that which transpires behind that which appears, which include subtle senses, subtle energy, implicate state, chaos theory, Fanon, Bacall, stereoscopic consciousness, multidimensionality, beings of light and universe of light, and the pull of the future, how we each uniquely transform the divine impulse that brought about our being, fulfilling our purpose in life.
That's great. Yeah, that's wonderful. And then for when we interview you and your beloved, what are you guys going to, can you describe just an overview of that work?
Well, that's what all the things I mentioned earlier in this call is about what we've been doing together.
Okay.
If you want to see some samplings, we've got several dozen videos of classes we've done on my YouTube channel, and they're grouped by series. And so there's one series called the Gabrielite Work. And then we have, I don't know if you know about the book that we recently published.
I don't know about the recent one.
Oh, definitely check this out. We are really proud of it. It's called Awakening as a Human * Divine Being.
Right.
And it's on Amazon. And for the first 3 weeks after it was published, it was the #1 book in new books in both Sufism and transpersonal psychology.
Great.
It's about 300 pages, and it's based on a whole series of classes we gave during the pandemic called, Awakening the Resurrection Body, Living in the Resurrection Body, Becoming a Human Divine Being, and then 6 meditations that I gave separate from that. But, I mean, and it's got lots of practices that we've come up with, creative ways of working with the divine names, and a lot of guided meditations.
That's really great. So we have a website which we have all the resources. So we'll be pulling together all of that so people can refer to it, in writing, so that they can, and links and so forth and so on. Anyway, that's enough of your time today. I appreciate your call back. So.
Okay, great. Well, let us know what's next.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. From Jack Kerouac's haikus, a turtle sailing along on a log, head up.
And here is If Not Now, When? Conversations with Alice Wyatt.
What is reality? My friend Julie told me she was writing a segment on reality for the Nameless Show, a podcast she produces. We were moving furniture at the time. Being hot and sweaty and trying not to be irritated with one another was our momentary reality, but it did get my brain cells churning. I am not a scientific person by nature, other than saying, look, cool, at cool stuff. I like to know facts. Just give me facts. Don't make me come up with theories and then prove them with scientific experiments. I am also a spiritual person, most definitely. But I have zoned out on many a deep theological discussion, is there a God, over the dinner table. Those college philosophy classes asking you to contemplate the reality of the chair you're sitting in would have me down at the administrator's office demanding my money back. So, what is reality? Is a question I've mostly left up to people who are a lot smarter and differently wired than I am. There's a genre of movie I avoid at all costs if possible. Inception, starring Tom Hardy and Leonardo DiCaprio, is one of them. It has a plot of mind manipulation, one set of characters controlling the minds and the perceived reality of others, trying to harvest subconscious memories in order to carry out a dastardly plot. Leonardo DiCaprio's character has a beloved wife whose mind snaps in the middle of all this. She flings herself out of a window, thinking she is living in a dream, and when she dies, she will wake up and be in the real world again. Does she die? Maybe she only dies in Leonardo DiCaprio's mind. Maybe she only lives in his mind. Maybe he is just dreaming. Maybe she is dreaming she is dreaming. At the end of the movie, I am a sweaty, anxious mess of existential angst. When my husband sits down to watch this movie for the 10th time, he asks me why I hate it so much. It takes me a while to put into words, but here's the gist of it. I've struggled with mental illness in the form of depression most of my adult life. I know what it is like to have something trigger chemicals in my brain, and suddenly a happy, joyful day becomes gray and oppressive. Nothing has changed about my physical reality, but my entire mental reality has shifted, and there is absolutely nothing I can do about it, except wait it out. I have two great fears in my life: my children dying and going off the edge mentally, descending into my own version of reality and never coming back, becoming a burden and heartbreak for those I love. So, watching a movie where reality is up in the air for entertainment? A true horror flick for me. I live in a very specific reality. It is the reality of physical health, heterosexual, married, mother, middle-class white, recovering evangelical, American woman. There are so many things I can never ever relate to, no matter how much I want to care or respond in a certain way. For example, a dear friend who is immune suppressed is going back into lockdown again due to the threat of the Delta variant of the COVID-19 virus. I sit night after night watching elite Olympic athletes who have spent years working towards a dream, finding that dream realized or crushed in the time it takes me to finish dinner. One of my best friends is a black male. I watched the Black Lives Matter protests through his eyes and wept while understanding that I really don't understand. 2 hours ago, my son calls to discuss a podcast about North Korea. He gives me facts: mass starvation, refugees having their organs harvested at the North Korean border for the Chinese black market. As he speaks, I want to put my hands over my ears, shut my heart. But this is reality, not mine, not his, but the reality of millions of North Koreans. If my specific reality is the lens through which I view the rest of the world, how do I live with integrity and compassion? Here are some guidelines that help me. I remind myself I can't know what is below the surface in another human being. I want to always create life with my words and actions. I work hard to understand what I have to offer the world from my reality and then offer it. I foster a life of continued learning. I try to zip my lips, avoid judgment, and assume positive intent when things go wrong. In the end, I will be gone, and only the love I've given others will go on. This morning, I watched my hen lay an egg. She hasn't come running with the others when I walk into the chicken yard with fresh tomatoes, her favorite treat. I find her crouching in a nesting box, head tucked, chicken bum facing the door. In total silence, her body strains. Then, a smooth brown egg slides out and lands gently in the straw. In awe, I reach out to touch the warm smoothness, the soft shell already hardening as it comes into contact with the air. The wonder of this fills me with a heady glee. Life is good. Life is sweet and beautiful and full of joy. This is my reality right now, and I will hold it gently in my heart and give thanks for it.
Cosmonauts and astronauts explore outer space, but there's an inner world as well. So let's explore beyond light and sound and time and space. Join us as we listen in to an experienced Innernaut, get introduced to a new language to describe uncharted, inverted space. We enter through the portal of dreams.
Last night was a big shift again, in that I was shown there comes a point in time where you actually catch up with something that's outside of the mind senses. And to do that, you have to forget everything that you know, and that you have to just go naturally with that. And when you do, everything comes to you. It's like it's all given, but it's all given from inside of yourself. There's a quality of something about you that just knows what is meant to unfold. Now, what a teacher once told me is that things are predestined. Everything is known, but nothing is for certain, which means that we can get caught up in the mind senses and we can spin away from that forever and ever. And so in my first meditation dream about this, I am a new student at a college seeking to orient myself to how things actually work. I'm excited to be here. It feels wonderful to me, but it's all brand new. And I'm noticing that all the other students at this place are going through some sort of conceptual motion about it all. They never quite realize that there is some simple thread through it all that you catch up with where it's not a struggle and what is meant to be is just there for you. That's apparently some peculiar secret because it hasn't reached the mind senses, although that's what we have available to us. So how are we going to accomplish or get anywhere? But each person has inside them a natural connection to what it's meant to be. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, I had the sense of this natural connection. It was like a controlled waiting, is what I called it. And I could tell that something was supposed to happen at some particular point. And yet, there was no way I could know what that was going to be. I even had a sense that when I got there, I wouldn't know how I got there. In other words, I'm functioning in ways that are outside of the manner that everybody else functions under. And so, it's like a breakthrough. And for me, it kind of popped in as I'm sitting on the cutting edge of the energetic flow, and I somehow or another break through some barriers. Now, we usually think we've done this with our mind senses, but there's a part of us inside that, because we are the permeating essence. It's what does the trick in terms of creating the coincidences, if we can get out of our mind sense way, that puts up the dullness. Most people never notice this. That's the way it always has been. It's the right space about things such that what is meant to be comes to you. The conditioning that prevails for most people weighs their heart down and never goes away. They stay in a bewildering search, trying to be in sync with something more, but they're just caught in the consciousness of being. They never get out of that. So I had an example where I could go to town, just on a walkabout, realize I'm a little hungry, and I can go into this place and it's just there for me, so to speak. I can ask for a steak and get served a steak. I notice that there are others that can do that too, but this place isn't on their own to command for anybody else. I pondered and pondered this. I realized this isn't for everyone, but it was given to me because I hit that natural little groove inside of what is meant to be. Otherwise, I get to follow the mind sense orientation about how everything goes to this and to that. It has a price and conditions and so on, so now I'm back at college and still on the first day, and I think it's in the late afternoon, and I see on a bulletin board, nobody pays attention to this bulletin board because I'm in some other kind of groove. I look at the bulletin board. Everyone else can gloss over it. No one else will pay attention to it if it's not somehow or another hitting this easy spot inside the groove. There's a first name, Ford, that's like a type of vehicle. And more than the mind senses because the symbolism of Ford, according to the Native Americans, is when they're making a joke about it, they say, found on reservation dead, Ford. Anyway, his name is Ford, and he invited people to his room. It doesn't make any sense. What's that about? It's going to be at 9 o'clock or something on the 12th. Then all of a sudden, I notice on the bulletin board to come to his room at 6 for a movie. So now I'm dumbfounded. I turn to someone and say, "Who is Ford?" I'm talking to a person who is not as serious as everyone else. And I learn from him that Ford quickly realized that college isn't what everyone goes there for. He saw through it all. And the next thing you know, he has 450 patents. All this coming through him that just made everything work out. He never had to do anything more. Everything was there for him. And it's like he's inviting others with a similitude, apparently. He stays in the groove. He never graduates. He keeps going and going. This learning isn't like everyone else's. For him, everything is effortless. Whatever a person is going to college to do, he already can do it. So thus, he is a forever student. He never graduates. All the doors actually open. I'm told the meaning of that. I go on and say that when a person comes to know that they are simply an intertwined, permeating flow, then they realize that this threads through everything. They need to be in sync with that. And when they are, everything is predestined. It's different than what everyone else has. Miss that, and you have this confusion. And each of us has that naturalness. The everyday malaise puts up the mind sense thoughts and weighs down all of this in terms of accessing that. What's funny is you see this weighing down everywhere, and it's like a challenge, a giggle, because you're not affected by it. And yet they do that because they think that that's what's important. That's what they've made important. And so the scenario which this comes from is, I'm suddenly realizing that in manifestation, I'm manipulated and controlled by mind senses that predominate everywhere. No one breaks free of it, and yet their head is a sixth sense group that out of my control and out of my mind senses is plugged in. Everyone else stays in a trance. Thus my dream has taken me back to a state within where what happens naturally and effortlessly is like a form of predestination, but from the standpoint that everything is known, but nothing is for sure. What that means is our mind senses can screw it up. And then I had a sleep dream. Same kind of thing. So it starts off that the sleep dream is a great big, really amazing truck. And my mother had to show me you have to put in a code to shift gears. And I still don't really know if I can handle it because it operates off some sort of coding that it grabs on its own, so to speak. So it's the next day, and I can handle the truck and the hood's up. And all of a sudden the truck is moving. The truck is talking to me. I can't see, just like having backup lights so you can look and see things behind you. Well, now all of a sudden, this special truck in my dream has a hood up, and I can't see the road. And it's telling me turn, 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 turn. Okay, now take a right. Take a right. Turn. Turn now. Turn now. And all I can see is I'm just missing the edges of the road and I'm turning properly where I'm told to turn. And I just keep going on. Apparently, I don't run into anything and nobody gets in my way. I go all the way to a place that it has directed me to go. And I somehow skid to a stop and I realize, wow, this is an easygoing, nice little spot. Not sure why I'm there. I'm there for a reason, of course. I haven't got the sense to grasp why that is. Turns out, it's a little bitty town, too. Well, I've got to somehow get the hood fixed to get back. How do I proceed from here? This is just the first stop. I don't know how to shift the gears. I don't know how to make this thing work. And yet it's operating on its own, and in its own fashion, and its own way outside of the mind senses. Well, it also turns out that there's some other things that need to be done before I took off on this truck. I needed my brother to handle something for me, and I learned from him that that isn't going to work. Who am I to expect him to know how to handle something when it's a challenge just for me? Really? And then I realized all I was expecting him to do is hold the space for a while. He can't do that. I still have to factor all that in. I'm realizing that something inside already predestines all that. So I have to settle back into it. I can't let the conditionality of things keep me distorted and torn down, because otherwise things that are possible wouldn't be possible. And it's all possible. There's a storyline, in other words, that I'm following, even though I don't know what that is. To be able to free flow on my own is meant to be. I just haven't gotten there yet. It's known within. It's a part of something that's outside of the mind senses. I remember in the college dream at one point, there was glancing how people were. There was this real tall guy that used to race faster than the others. I realized if you kept up with the way he did it, he's out-quickening everybody else. There is something to that. Again, outside of the mind senses. Now Cindy had a dream, and in her dream, she had a certain destiny that was laid out in front of her. But then to get that to accomplish something, it's suddenly off the ground. How do you bring that down? How do you ground that? And then everything would naturally be in the groove. An interesting theme, and I could try to describe a scenario where all of a sudden I was doing things that I know I should be doing. And by doing those things, it turned out just right. When finally in the outer, I get the rest of the information, and I realize that I had somehow, by a kind of sense, a sense that isn't tuned into the mind senses, that is turned into a type of listening field. I naturally hit what needed to be hit, and who would have ever guessed that that was possible? That was the scenario. And that scenario was going up against a set of conditioning that veils in a huge way wherever I look, and yet that cut through it. It makes you ponder the question, if God were to come into this world, would anybody notice? We certainly won't if all we've got going is the mind senses. We'll miss it completely.
Next time on Nameless,
Don Weiner will be back, this time with his wife Diane, to help us delve further into what part we humans play in the unfolding of consciousness. In our prep work for the Nameless show, we have come across some provocative quotes. We have culled 365 of these from our work with quantum mechanics, mysticism, and alchemy to post on our Twitter feed, Daily Dervish. Dervishes are infamous for saying or doing something disruptive to the collective amnesia. Get your daily disruption on twitter.com by subscribing to Daily Dervish.
if you have enjoyed what you heard in this episode, please be sure to tap the subscribe button on your favorite platform for the latest episodes from Nameless, Evolution Begins Within, which come out every other week. Time is precious in this dimension. Thank you for spending some of yours with us. Transcripts are available in multiple languages, including English, Spanish, and Hindi. If you would like a transcript in your native tongue, please email us at thenamelessshow@gmail.com. For article citation, links for further study, and show references, please go to thenamelessshow.com. A big thank you to all team members who made this project possible. Christina Rhodes, Cheryl Ray, Carol B., Tracy McGowan, Yoselin Riojas, David Clare, John Rowley, Randall Burkhart, Elise Brianne, and Rain Jubilee, and our marketing team at sparknerds.oi. The theme sound for Nameless was created by Rob Carey at Cosmic Turtle Sound Studios, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Additional music by Paul Lee, Dan Gallagher, Rory Morella, and AJ Pantaleo. Voiceover talent for the listening in segments by Yasna Brown, Teresa Langston, and John Bellimer. The Nameless Show, copyright 2021, under Sophia Unity Foundation. Wisdom is one.